Welcome to this very special episode of the Coaching Circle podcast. And today I have a very special guest with me, and we're going to be talking about using positive psychology in the workplace. And I'm super keen for what we're going to learn in this episode because today's guest is a wonderful woman who I have worked with over the last few years. And Marg Edgecombe is the founder and principal coach and trainer of Me, My Strength, and I. And through individual and team coaching and a range of training packages, Marg empowers leaders, teams, and organizations to thrive by aligning their strengths and values with workplace well-being to really unlock meaningful results and create elevated productivity. So welcome to the Coaching Circle, Marg Edgecombe. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Tony. It's such an honour to be here. I love this podcast, so it's great to join you.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, good, good. And like I said, we've known each other for a few years now, and I've got to know quite a bit about you and your vast experience and background in leadership, and obviously all the amazing tools that you have around strengths and values and coaching and in that space. But I'd really love to start, Marg, and we'll get into this because you are a very fascinating person as well. I might add with all the other interests and things that you have in the background. But what is it that led you to start your business, and why is it that what you do is important to you?
Well, there's a couple of things there. I've been really interested in positive psychology for a number of years. I've worked in local government and in the arts and culture sector for a number of years. And in that time, I became moved more and more into leadership roles. And I realised that leadership's not just knowing your stuff and being a specialist in an area. It's about the psychology of the people around you. It's about knowing your own psychology and knowing your own mind and helping people to work to their best ability. So I'm really passionate about helping people understand how their minds work, how their brains work, two sort of slightly different things, um, and helping them to achieve their best through reframing the way they think. Um, and I started the business because we had a major restructure at the place I was working at, and I was planning to do this in about 5 years' time, and it all just happened. And so I took a package, and I'm now building the business. Um, I got really interested in positive psychology when I was in leadership because Martin Seligman, who was the considered to be the father of positive psychology, came to Adelaide as one of the thinkers in residence. There was an amazing program in Adelaide many years ago called the Thinkers in Residence, and they brought in
Mm.
specialists from all sorts of areas like health and public transport planning and filming and all range of things. And he came into Adelaide just at the time when I was moving into leadership and sort of having this realization about the power of the mind.
Mm.
And I went to everything he did in Adelaide and just got right into it. Went and did a diploma in positive psychology, then started getting accreditation in some of the packages that um, and the tools that you can use. Used them as on myself and saw the changes in myself that made. Did the sort of N=1 scientific study on myself.
Mm.
Used them with my teams and saw the impact with my teams, and thought actually there's something in this, and it sort of just shifted my whole direction, working
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Marg. And I think, and I love the serendipity of how often, we get on these paths of what moves us forward or I always say like endings always create the best beginnings
Yeah,
because it's always there's something that happens. You think, oh, this isn't what I expected, but it actually opens the door for something new, which is brilliant. Obviously, sometimes it gives us that little push that we need.
yeah.
But what's really interesting, Mark, and I've been thinking about this, is that definitely there was a time, and hopefully it is changing a lot more now, but there was definitely a time where people would just sort of get shifted up into leadership roles because they were really good at their job or that they'd been there for a long time, but they didn't necessarily have the people skills.
Mm.
And it was just kind of expected that, okay, now if you're doing your job really well, you must be able to lead other people to do their job
Mm.
really well. Is that a sort of experience that you have had in the workplace or you've seen in the workplace?
Oh, absolutely. I've both had it myself and seen it. Like, as I said, I had to learn a lot of those skills. One of the important things was actually to learn more about myself. Um, a bit like doctors, leaders should do no harm. And
Mm,
my apologies to anyone that I did lead when I was still learning. I'm sure I made mistakes. And I think we've all had those experiences in the workplace of learning from really good leaders, people who support you, see who you are, help you with your own growth. And we also have experiences of leaders who are not doing that, who actually stilt your growth, don't see your potential, keep you at a level of frustration and don't sort of see your strengths, and the impact that that has on people.
yeah.
And so I think we learn from both the good and the bad leaders we've had in the course of our working lives. Um, and yeah, to me, that's the important element of leadership, is this understanding your mind and being able to help people with their own strengths and to progress.
And really help them progress. Yeah, I think that's great, Marg. And I think it's such a powerful thing being able to reflect on your own journey and think about, okay, what I now know about leadership, uh, I probably could have done with knowing back in a different time. But I
Mm.
think that's the same with anything. And it's the same with me when I think about coaching. I'm like, I know how I coach now is at a very different level than how I coached when I first started. But the only way I got here was by going through that process.
Absolutely.
And I think, this is something that's really common for people in whatever space, whether it's leadership, whether it's going into business or coaching or whatever, that you do go through that process of where you're on the journey and you're not at the destination. And I know for me, like when I'm talking to people about this, I'm really big on that your intention really makes all the difference. Like where is your intention? What would you expand on that, do you think, with leadership, Marg, for people who feel like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in the deep end in leadership, and they don't want to be doing any harm to people. But from that space of intention, what would you think would be a helpful thing for leaders to know?
Well, I think that mostly is knowing themselves,
Mm,
knowing how knowing their own strengths. So what are the things that drives them? What motivates them? Knowing their team, what motivates their teams, and then being able to work that as a sort of symbiotic relationship.
mm,
Um, Knowing the power of language, um, knowing having emotional intelligence, and,
yeah.
and being able to read themselves and control their own emotions, park things when it's not when they're feeling triggered by something, being able to do that,
Mm,
and then being able to read people in their team's emotions. And I always think that workplaces, so many people spend so much time at their workplaces, and if we can get workplaces to a place where they are doing no harm, where they're actually supporting people to live their best lives. So it's not just a sort of going in and drudgy place, um, or just sort of being on the hamster wheel. It's a
mm,
place where you can actually thrive.
mm.
It's so important. I'm just really passionate about making workplaces really healthy places. And
Yeah.
that's not just, having the favourite vegetable of the month and how to cook it. That's what we used to do for workplace health. Get enough sleep, and here's the
Mm.
vegetable of the month. There's so much more to do.
Yeah. And I think, but you're right there. It's on that space of really having, you've just got to start with the intention. What is my intention here? My intention, yeah, it do no harm, but essentially what does that mean? That I'm positively contributing. I think
Mm.
that's the thing, isn't it? If you have people who are in that space of my intention is to positively contribute to my team, my workplace, my career, my clients, whoever that might be, like do you think like that's the core of all of it?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the other thing about leadership is that you're leading your people, you're leading your team. You're also responsible for a whole lot of things in the organisation that sometimes you can't share with your team.
Mm,
So you're sometimes in this sort of middle space, and you have to be comfortable with that. You have to be comfortable with that. You have to be able to be authentic in that space. You're sort of leading up and leading down often,
mm,
unless you're the CEO, of course.
yeah.
And often CEOs are leading up to their board or their, whatever situation they're in. Um, so yeah, the intention is to do the best that you can do so that you're also modeling that for your team.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point that you just said then, Marg, as well, about that there's times where you know things that you can't share with your team for whatever reason. And I think that's a really key thing about the sort of relationship that you have with people. And
Mm.
is that one of the challenge that you would see, like where someone's maybe been on par with other people in the team, and then perhaps they've got a promotion and that they're at another level? And then how do you see that kind of makes a change in the relationship that they might have, like existing relationship with other people in the team?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one when you move from, especially if you become a leader of a team that you've been a member of. That's a
Mm,
really interesting transition, and it's not unlike, moving into being in business. It's a shift of identity for
mm,
yourself and for others. I think the main thing is to just be as authentic as you can and to share what you can
mm,
and uh, be open and transparent about things that you can't share. I can tell you about this later. I can't tell you about it now.
mm.
There's
Yeah.
things happening, blah, blah, blah. Um, I think, one of the things I've noticed when I first moved into leadership was suddenly, and I'd been in the organisation for a shorter amount of time than the rest of my team, who had been there for quite some time. And I actually asked them, I'm going to go for this job. But if any of you are, I won't because you've been here for longer. But
Mm.
oh, no, 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 we don't want it. We don't want it. And then suddenly I found that I was being asked questions about the organisation, about the history of the organisation, things that I suddenly was needed. I was expected to know stuff about everything
Yeah.
because I was the leader. You know, so I mean
Yes.
those sorts of shifts are really interesting. Um, but yeah, the shift, you don't always, in a leadership position, you're not always part of the team anymore. There is that sort of slightly um,
Well, it's a
uh,
different role in the team,
different
isn't it?
role. But
Yeah.
I think some of these tools really help to flatten that out a little bit.
Yes.
Because if we're working on things like, for instance, if you're working with team strengths, uh, you're sharing also what your strengths are with the team. And so people are seeing you've got your own uh, things that you're really good at, things that you're not so good at. And if you're sharing that across a team, it evens that out a bit. You've just got a different role. You're just
Mm.
responsible for different things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, this kind of leads us in, Marg, as well, to just learning a bit more about, the key strategies and what the tools that you use that really get the best results with leaders and their teams. And you just mentioned then a little bit about strengths, but can you share a bit more about that and that work and how it really does help people in the workplace?
sure. I use a tool called the Strengths Profile tool. It's been designed by positive psychology researchers, organisational researchers. And the idea is that in the old days we used to, we come from a school system and a work system where if you were not doing something well, you would have a performance management situation where you were expected to pull your socks up, or you got your school report and you got three B's and a D. Well, let's focus on this D. What's
Mm,
the problem here? The problem there is that whatever you're doing in the D probably doesn't motivate you at all. So you're just not interested in putting in the time and the effort.
mm,
So the same applies in that strengths model, but the process that we use there is that there are strengths that you use all the time that motivate you and that you do really well. There's also things that you do really well that you've had to learn. They're sort of learned behaviours you've had to learn, and they don't really motivate you all that much.
Mm.
My example of that was, as a leader and a manager, you have to manage things. So I used to have to do the budgets and the OC health and safety reports and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I could do them well. I learned how to do them. I could do them well. There was never a problem with them, but I just, like it was like pulling teeth. I'd leave them till the last thing on a Friday afternoon if they were due, that sort of
Good
thing.
times.
So they didn't motivate me at all. One of the things I love about this model is we've also got our unrealized strengths. So they're the things we do really well, and they really motivate us. But perhaps we're not using them enough, and they become the new performance management situation. There's a whole lot
Mm.
of research to show that if you work with your teams and you focus on their weaknesses, let's get you up to scratch on this, it actually demotivates them by quite a substantial percent. But if you work with people on their strengths and help them to increase the things that they do really well and motivate them, then you get so much more productivity out of them.
Yes, this is it, and it makes sense really when you think about it in that way, isn't it? Because if you just sit there and focus on what's not so good about someone,
Mm.
then it seems like that's the most important thing about them. But if you're focusing on what they do really well and what's their strengths, well, then that becomes more of the most important thing about
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that would be a real identity shift, and I can imagine that. Uh, that is really powerful. And I think it's interesting actually, because I was speaking with one of my clients recently who did, I gave her some exercises to do with her team around their inherent values. And she was saying the feedback was like some of the staff really loved it, and some of them felt really uncomfortable sharing what that was.
Mm.
Is that something you've ever come across, Marg, where like people in the team maybe feel like drawing attention to their strengths can feel a little bit um, like they don't want to draw attention to themselves?
No, I haven't encountered that. The opposite, actually. I think that
Mm.
drawing attention to people's strengths and um, for them to be able to share their strengths with their team members actually makes them feel like they're being seen.
Well, yeah, like I think if you do it in like a in a structured way, like you do,
Mm.
absolutely. But if it wasn't that format, do you think that sometimes people are like, they don't want to sort of big note themselves or um is there ever like that kind of tall poppy syndrome type thing where like having
Uh,
a structure like this actually normalizes it and helps people, be okay
I
with
think that's the key. That's
yeah.
absolutely the key is normalizing it and having that vocabulary of strengths. And,
Mm,
and so that people realize that we're not all the same. And to be, I had a team, one of my teams, everyone was so different. They were different in the way that they saw the world. That, some people were you could communicate them by just turning around and quickly saying something and they'd remember it, all the time. Someone you'd have to send an email to, all those sorts of things. Someone's really good at telling stories.
mm,
Someone just would rather write a report, and to know that and to normalize that, that's when you really get team cohesion, because then you can work out, we've got this job to do, who's really good at this bit, who's really good at that bit, and you use
mm,
people's strengths, and then everyone's getting seen, valued,
yeah.
um, feel like they're contributing to their best.
Yes.
Yeah.
And would that would then, I guess, also take out competition in a way if everybody's recognized for their own unique strengths
Mm,
and values, then
mm,
it's not like, oh, that person's getting recognized, why aren't I?
yeah.
It's like we know what everyone's value is and what their
Yes.
strengths are. Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
and those conversations then become normal. Um, people then draw on each other for those strengths, and even if they're working on
Yes.
something and they're stuck, they can go, oh, they've got a strength in that, I'll just get some advice from them.
Yes. So
I
it
used to have
becomes
a
much more collaborative.
Yeah, exactly. I used to have it, I talked about the OC health and safety reports I used to have to do. One of my colleagues was absolutely amazing, creative thinker, all the things we needed in the arts, great community facilitator, etc. She loved OC health and safety.
Wow.
And
Congratulations.
yeah, I know. And so when I'd go, oh, I've got to do the OC health and safety report, she'd go, I'll do it. and for her, that was like a personal and professional development opportunity. She'd just
Yeah.
do it, and then all I had to do was read it and go, "Yep, fantastic."
Yes.
Add a couple of things, flick it off, and it was all done. And the work got done. Everyone felt fantastic, and it was using people's strengths. So
Yeah, and I think that's such an important thing, Mark, because I think we can easily go, oh, well, if I don't like it, nobody else likes it. And so, I don't want to be seen as palming off to somebody else. But
yeah,
the fact is, there could very well be people, just because you don't find it energizing, doesn't mean other people don't. And there can very much be other people that are like, yes, please, I
yeah.
would be happy to do that.
I was working with a team recently, and two people had counterpoint as one of their strengths, as one of their top strengths. And counterpoint is when you can always see an alternate view to something.
Mm,
But when we identified that these two people had it, I sort of made the joke of I'd love to be in their one-to-ones, because would always be going, well, what about this and what about that? And that sort of, it was like a bit of a light bulb moment for them, because they went, oh yeah, right. So, they felt they could sometimes feel that friction in the conversations, but it was
yeah.
actually because they were both using their power, their counterpoint. And you can all, with this model, you can learn to recognize those things and then dial those down when that's not appropriate, and
Mm.
then dial it up when you need to use it.
Yeah, well, and that comes to that, having awareness is key.
Mm.
Because if, yeah, like you said, if they're not aware about that and what is that process of, well, processing thought or
Mm.
ideas or whatever, it can come across as, because, this is the thing, I guess, when we talk about rapport is a process of likeness. So the more that we've got likeness, the more that we generally get in rapport. So if there's mismatching,
Mm.
of which that's what it sounds like. I'm not an expert on their strengths, but that counterpoint sounds a little bit like mismatching. It's like I can always, part of processing is I find a different viewpoint. Is that essentially
Yes,
what it
yeah.
is? Yeah.
But they were both finding different viewpoints all the
Yes.
time, because it
So
was
back
such
and
a struggle.
forward. So it
Yeah.
would be like this consistent mismatching, like
Mm.
there's consistent, like not likeness there, which unrecognized would feel like a lack of rapport, no doubt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Mark. That's fantastic. So, Mark, I would love to know, like, when you go in now with the role that you do, helping leaders and teams, like, what is it that you really do? Like, how is it that you know where to start or how to work out what the best thing is going to be for that team? Like, what is it that you find is the strategy that gets the best results when you go in and
Well,
work with?
first of all, I talk to the team leader, the organisational people, and find out what the issues are. And they might, sometimes the issues are there's problems to fix, and sometimes the issues are they just want to be better. So find out where they're at,
Mm,
and then we would do. There's several packages that I offer. Um, so some are around the strengths and using strengths with teams and doing values work with that, and that's professional and personal values and how they interact with each other and interact as a team, using values and strengths to drive strategy. Um, so there's those sorts of packages. I've also got general packages about workplace well-being. So that's about reframing thinking and using positive psychology tools to improve people's well-being. And
mm,
sometimes that is the issue, that people are just not feeling great about the workplace or great about the world, or there's a lot
mm.
of change and they just need to sort of lift that thinking, change the mindset.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also do individual coaching, and sometimes that's the leader that just needs some individual coaching to feel comfortable to step into that role,
Yeah.
or
So
to or
it's
to
quite a,
increase that role.
yeah, yeah. So it's quite an adaptable approach, really,
Mm.
just looking at, okay, what's actually needed here. So, what do you think? What are some of the common causes of a team or a leader needing some extra help? I mean, you mentioned some change and things like that. What are some of the common, I guess, if people are sort of going, oh, okay, things maybe feel a bit challenging in my role, or the team's not quite operating, what are some of the common things that they could identify as having perhaps been the cause for where things are at the moment?
Um, One of them is when there's a change in the team, so new people coming in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that can always upset a team, and it's about people being able to be seen again. So you go back and sort of do that
Mm.
team forming again.
That's
Some
that
of
group
it's change.
dynamics of forming, norming, and
Yeah,
performing. Yeah,
yeah,
storming, norming, performing, whichever way it goes. Yeah.
exactly. Some of it's around if there's organisational change, it could be the direction of the change or team shifted into other directorates or whatever, whatever the structure is.
Mm.
Um, and that can really throw people around, and that's about looking after people's well-being, helping them do things like reframe their thinking around their mindset, growth mindset sort of work. Some of it's around that learned optimism, that this isn't just necessarily about me, it's not pervading everything in my life, it's not permanent, it's just sort of helping people to
Mm.
reframe their thinking around those sorts of things. um, and some of it for the leaders is just that shift of um, I've got a transformational coaching process called Get Out of My Own Way. It's about people sort of
Mm.
recognizing their own limitations, their own limiting beliefs, and overcoming those. Uh,
Mm.
and they can be powerful for both the leaders and people in the teams who might be wanting to move into a different role.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there's all kinds of change. And I guess, one of the things that I often talk about as well is that, yeah, so it could be change and those kinds of things. But even whenever we set a goal of
Mm.
something that we haven't achieved before, that throws up challenges as well,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's that, I guess that, ties into what you were saying about the program, getting out of my own way. It's like, well, who do I need to become to be able to achieve this goal? And
Absolutely.
yeah, and essentially, what do I need to let go of, I
Yeah,
guess, as well.
and
Yeah.
and when I mean I've developed that program from obviously from the work I've done with you in neuro-linguistic programming and timeline therapy and
Mm.
hypnosis, and incorporating the strengths and the positive psychology into that. And I just sometimes think, oh God, if I just had that at the beginning of my leadership process, it would have been amazing. And
Yes.
some of it can be really simple things of like my thing was my limiting belief was that I wasn't enough. And so I spent a lot of time in my working life over, the last 50 years just striving, or, 40
Mm.
something years, striving to prove that I was enough, that there was enoughness there.
Yeah.
If I'd actually just cleared that early on, the sky's the limit. And
Yeah.
that's the stuff that I love, is helping people get out of their own way.
Yes.
And to also understand that other people are potentially dealing with that stuff themselves. And so,
Mm.
some of the stuff that's happening is just smoke and mirrors. But
Mm.
if you can actually clear the smoke for yourself, you can actually lead the way.
Yeah, so true. And it's interesting. I just remembered I saw a quote. I used this actually with some of my business clients just recently. It was a quote by John Maxwell, and I can't remember word for word, but it was essentially whenever I see people uh like stepping ahead of the pack in their progression, I can always bet it's been due to their personal development.
Yes. Mm.
And it's so true, isn't it? It's
Mm.
that if you're in that leadership space to really accelerate, it's always going to come from that personal growth.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, such powerful work. And I love what you said, Marg, about that. This is what if only I had this, because it is legitimately why, I don't know, for me as well, why you become so passionate about what you deliver, because it's like you've got lived experience, like, the challenges, the struggle, the pain, like all of those things. And it's like you go on this big journey to be able to solve it. And then you're like, oh my God, this is so important. If I can give this to people to save them that
Yeah,
journey, it gives you such a
absolutely.
sense of, like, I know for me, like, fulfillment and purpose in what it is that you do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. Well, this is fascinating, Mark, and I would love to just shift gears a little bit, because it is like, I think leadership is relevant to people across the board. And obviously you're working a lot in, larger organizations and the leadership and team sort of structure there, but it also applies to business. And I know that there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who have their own business or their own coaching or consulting, and even there's businesses that aren't in that space but are interested in leadership and things like that, which applies to when you start your own business. So I'd love to just shift a little bit towards, your business journey. And I would love to start with the challenges. What do you feel like has been the most challenging thing for you in business, and how have you dealt with it? And I guess, how do you apply your understanding of leadership to business?
I reckon the most challenging thing for me has been that shift of identity. And you talk about this on this podcast quite a bit. And it's definitely quite a shift from being an employee to being a business owner.
Mm,
It's also it's aligned to that shift from to being a leader. It's about taking responsibility.
mm,
And when you're working, when you've got a job, you go to work, you get paid, you do the work, you get paid regardless.
mm,
You focus on what you have to focus on, and you don't have to focus on lots of other things. When you're a sole operator, as I am, I have to be the finance department, the admin department, the communications department. So all of that is, you have to take responsibility for all parts of business, not just the thing that you love doing of standing up
mm.
and facilitating or coaching with people. Um, One of my challenges is doing sort of this visibility stuff, like being on social media and doing this sort of stuff. I've
Mm,
I've been a facilitator for years. I can stand up in front of a crowd of people and do stuff. It's quite easy for me now. I've had to learn it,
yes.
but it's quite easy for me now. But doing the social media stuff has been interesting, learning how to do that, not just the standing up and doing it, but also the tech side of it, just sort of learning. There's a whole lot of new skills around that stuff that I've had to learn.
Mm,
So that's been challenging. And I have used the leadership skills that I would use with a team. I've used my strengths, I've used my, mindset shifts, and I've had a coach.
yeah.
I, I can't stress enough the value of having a business coach, and I've tapped into all sorts of, there's lots of resources out there for people in business, and you can tap into free things that the government offers, and there's different networking groups and all those sorts of things. So I've tapped into those, but having a coach is the most powerful,
Mm.
because you can work on the specifics for yourself that you need to shift.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, Mark, not just because I'm a business coach, but because I have my own coaches.
Yeah.
As a coach, I have my own coaches. And in fact, at the moment, I've probably got, I could say I've got four coaches. Two, one's probably more around the personal development around work, one's probably more around the like sales and communications, coaching and work, one's
Mm.
more around like the funnel and tech sort of stuff in business. And then I've got I've got a few coaches that probably I talk to because I've got a lot of coach friends around like personal and life stuff. So
Mm. Mm.
I 100%, and I think this is really important that when you are in business, that whatever it is that you do, especially if you're coaching, that you do actually have a coach, because I think, how else are you congruent that it's important to have a coach if
Yeah,
you
that's
don't
right.
have one for yourself?
Yeah.
And I think that's like anything. I think the old days of like, the whole old analogy of like the mechanic having the worst car. I think we're a bit beyond that now, right?
Mm.
It doesn't
Yeah.
quite cut it. And so yeah, I really like that, Marg. I think it's such an important thing. And I think as well, it leads back into what you were saying about as a leader taking responsibility. And it's taking responsibility for those things. It's taking responsibility for getting the results that you want. So part of that, yeah, very well be having a coach to get you doing the things that you need to do, right?
Yeah. And it's also important to sort of be around other people doing the same thing. So some of the programs of yours that I've been involved in, where I'm networking with other people that are doing different businesses, but all facing similar sorts of challenges in stepping
Mm,
into that business space. that's really useful to see how other people are doing it, to just be in that mindset more often
Yeah.
than you used to be. I find it quite fascinating, in a workplace where, and disclosure, I've actually still got a part-time job, but,
Yeah.
in a
A
workplace,
lot of people do when they're starting a
yeah,
business, right? It's very
yeah.
normal. Yeah.
Um, it sort of, I can sort of step back and look at the workplace as a concept rather than being
Mm,
sort of engaged in it fully. And I can
yes.
see how the dynamics all play out. And that's the
Yeah.
same as when you're in working, when you're sort of associating with other businesses, you can see how their dynamics are playing out, and that helps you to drive your own. Or
Yeah, so much being more in that observer role, and it's spot on though, because the thing and I know when I started my business, none of my friends, or maybe like one friend, but no, none of my close friends had businesses.
mm,
Like they were very much they had jobs, right?
mm,
And that's all fine. People have jobs, it's normal. But that I think you're really on it there around, and I think this applies to leadership as well. If you move into leadership, it's probably a good idea that you've got other friends who are in leadership so that you're connecting with them. And definitely in business. And that's why I've been so keen on building communities. And I realized over time that probably I was building these communities for my own benefit as much as anybody else's. But
mm,
yeah, just having people around you that normalizes that what you're going through and what you're thinking about and the challenges that you have and all those kinds of things is really important. And I always the other part of that, I always think, and I still do to now, I'll pay for proximity, right? So I'll
mm,
get as close as I can to the people who are getting these kinds of results and living the type of life that I want to live. And I think that's also the benefit of having a coach. So for like your clients, Mark, like, and this, I think this is really important as well around that people aren't just paying for strengths and values when they work with you. They're paying for your neurology, your
mm,
lived experience,
mm,
like how you react, how you think about challenges in the workplace and leadership roles and teams and all those kinds of things. And that's what people get, I think, from having a coach or being in that close proximity. It's not just necessarily what you're teaching, but it's the neurology that you have that they get, you know, the access to, which has been developed over however many years that you've
mm,
worked in that space.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I would encourage people, no matter where they are in a workplace, or in business, but in a workplace, to not just think I can get a coach if I become a leader, but to
Mm.
just to try, and if it's not coming through the professional development program, do it anyway yourself. And it
Yeah.
might not be a formal process, but go and go and find somebody in the workplace that you see working in the way that you would like to work, and have a coffee with them and talk to them about how they do stuff, and make it, even if
Mm.
it's an informal process, but have a coach, in whatever part of
Or
your life you're
mentor
wanting to.
or yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I think that very much ties into even what we were saying at the start, Marg, about, throughout your journey, there's leaders that you have that inspire you about, who you'd want to become, but there's also leaders that kind of, show you perhaps what you don't want to become.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get stuck on that, oh, what I didn't like and what people didn't do well or whatever. But I think, what you're just saying there is so important about really making a point of seeking out people who do it well, who you
Mm,
admire, and that you feel like, yeah, there's actually parts of what you're doing I would like to know more about
mm.
how to
And
do
of course, I say that from a place of always having a top strength. Whenever I do my strengths profile, which I do every year or so, um, curiosity is always right up there. Curiosity and learning
mm,
is right up there. Some people don't have that, and that scares them. I
mm,
think, we have to acknowledge that some people don't necessarily want to shift, but those who do,
yeah,
you don't have to do it on your own. I had this
yeah,
situation recently where my toilet had been running for ages, and I thought, oh, I just got to call a plumber and get it fixed. And I thought, hang on a minute, I'm sure there'll be something on YouTube about that. And I looked it up, and there it was. And I did it, and I learned how to do it, and and fix the toilet. I think people I think you and I have talked about this before. You can find anything you need to find on YouTube, but or on the internet. You can do the research, but you can fast track that process by working with someone who's already done years of that learning and
Yeah.
research and formed it into a package of coaching or whatever the program is that can
Yeah.
help you fast track that without having to take that time yourself.
Yeah, yeah, so true. And I think, what you were saying just before, even, that not everyone wants to be on a fast track growth for
Mm,
wherever. It reminded me of, I'm trying to think who talked about it now. Somewhere I listened into something and I was saying about, in every team you'll have the rock stars who are like the rocks, like the foundations that are there, that are like
mm,
consistent and they're happy to stay in whatever role, but they're so still super valuable for the ongoing thing.
mm,
And then there'll be the superstars that are like out, leading the way and wanting to grow and go further and do all that kind of stuff, and recognizing that in each area, and the value of both the rock stars and the superstars, in the support that they need. And I think the thing that popped to mind about even like the rock stars, like the people that aren't necessarily wanting to grow, coaching doesn't necessarily mean it's like you having to go somewhere. Sometimes it can just be you need some help to navigate staying where you want to be, right? It could
yeah.
be something else is there that getting that help might save you from resigning or looking elsewhere, or
Mm, mm.
yeah.
And there's some fascinating research in organizational psychology around the people who are actually the influencers in organizations. They're not always the people you think they might be. They might be the people, they might not be the leaders or the CEOs or the directors, or, they're not necessarily the ones that are influencing the organization. They can sometimes be those people that have been there for a long time, and they know
Mm,
things, and they can help people find what they're looking for, and they've got the ideas, and it's
yeah.
sometimes surprising, where those sort of they've done all sorts of mapping in organisations to see where some of those things happen, and it might not be in your team. You might be influencing another team just by the way you think, because your thinking, that your thinking in your specialist area might be able to influence somebody's thinking in another specialist area.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
Super fascinating, Mark. I just like I'm just thinking of all these different people that I worked with over my career in different ways and things, and it's really, really fascinating. But I'd love to know though, because we spoke about what are the challenges in business, and of course, everyone has challenges in business. So thank you for sharing that around, even the visibility in the social media, because I think that's really common that a lot of people have those kind of challenges. But what do you think, if we look on the flip side of that, what do you think is like the most rewarding thing about having your own business and what you do?
I've always had a strong need for autonomy, so this actually helps to fill that. I get to choose the work I do, the subject matter. I get to choose that, what I want to do, when I want to do it, and how much of it I want to do. That's not to say you choose that, I'm only going to work 2 days a week or whatever. There's often a lot more work particularly in the beginning. But that's feeding into a future that I'm forming. So
Mm,
I love that about business. I love I love the fact that I can just dedicate myself to the work that I want to be doing, and I'm not being thrown off course.
mm,
Um, I love uh, I love being able to help people.
yeah.
I mean, my business is around helping people, and I really love holding that space for people to make that shift and that transformation. I
Mm,
love watching I love watching the penny drop for them when
mm,
they make that shift, and then months later, I'm either catching up with them as a formal thing, or you bump into them and they'll say, "That just changed my life." I love
yeah.
that. I love having that sort
Yes.
of influence and contribution to the world, making that
Yes.
sort of difference. That's a top strength of mine, is making a difference. Um,
Yeah,
So I
I
love
feel
being
like
able
that is like such a what you just spoke about there, Margot. It's like it's such an honor. I feel to
to,
be able to like provide that for people.
yeah,
Yeah, it's an incredible feeling. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah.
No, that's it, it totally is it totally is. Um, I like the fact too in business that I can work from home. We can do a lot of this stuff by Zoom these days. You know,
Yes.
COVID offered the world a fantastic opportunity. We all fast tracked our thinking around that, and that means that I can, you know, between clients go and pull a few weeds in the garden or
Yes.
go and
Absolutely.
with my cat
It's
or whatever, you know.
Yeah, but it's so true. This whole thing with Zoom, though, it just makes it so, like coaching so much more accessible for
Yeah,
people, right?
it
Because, like,
is. Yeah,
sure, there's still people, like, probably 90% of my coaching's online, but I still have people who like to come to my office just because they can.
yeah,
And that's great. My office is at home as well. But there's so many other people that I have access to me because of Zoom, which I think
yeah,
is such a fabulous thing. And even I think in the leadership space, um, I think sometimes it even is like makes it more like easy for people to get coaching because they can be in their own comfortable space and talking to
I
you.
agree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's really cool. So,
yeah,
and you did mention uh your weeding and the cat and things, and I'm going to ask you a bit more about that because you're very fascinating with some of the things that you do. But I think the last thing I just want to ask in the from the perspective of what you do and how you help people, what's something that you would really want organizations or leaders or people in teams to know about working with a coach such as yourself that could really help them make a career changing or even life changing decision?
yeah. Well, um, you know, I think it's working with a coach isn't about trying to fix something. Working with a coach can be about taking those next steps and recognizing your own self and your own growth.
Mm.
Working with a coach doesn't mean that it's not a magic bullet. You have
Mm.
to take responsibility. You have to do the work.
Mm.
I know there's lots of people who will go and have a coaching session and then they'll say, my coach says blah, blah, and they're still not doing that thing. You know, they have to, you know, and it's not about telling people what they need to do. It's about pulling that out of them.
Mm.
And, uh, and that's where the transformation happens when they make those own realizations about themselves.
Yeah,
Allowing themselves to be vulnerable enough to realize where they're at and where they want to be and what that gap is. And
yeah,
then the coach can help them find the ways to move closer and the systems to move closer to where they want to be.
yeah. It's almost
Um,
like you kind of drawing out their ability to be self-led.
yes, yeah.
Yeah,
And somewhere deep in all of us, we all know who we are, what our gaps are, what our limiting beliefs are, what our emotions are. You know, we all know. We just have to be willing to open up to that.
yes. And that's the thing, isn't it? Having a coach there that can guide you along that way makes it, I think, definitely for me, my experience, it makes it just so much less scary, when
Mm,
you've got someone else there who's I always think about it like, they're shining the way. It's like, I've been there before you. I know the path. It's
mm, mm,
okay. Even if you don't know where it's going,
mm,
I'm lighting this path for you. I think that
mm.
gives people so much greater certainty in that journey.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fabulous. Mark, it's been really incredible listening to what you share and your insights around positive psychology and strengths and values and the work that you do and the amazing experience that you've had that you draw on in your own leadership career. But what I would love to just end on, because, the thing is that I think more and more these days it's becoming really relevant that we all realize that we are all individual people and we're not just our role and we're not just our business. So, can you share with us a little bit about what you do for fun, Mark? Because I'm always super fascinated in what you do.
Yes, I am I always say in another life, I'm a singing cowgirl. I sing and play mandolin on a community radio program that was loosely started as being loosely sort of alternative country music.
Yeah.
And we all did very ironic versions of songs in a country style. So I do that. I sing with another woman, and we've been doing that for the 25 years, and we've got our own very unique style of playing and a unique timing together, but we've developed that very closely and sing in harmony together, and I love that.
Yes.
Uh, I am really interested in permaculture as a system of being in the world, and it's not just around gardening and land management, it's around people and thinking around the a whole lot of ways of being in the world. And I'm in the back of my mind, I'm formulating a something about putting the permaculture uh, ethics and the permaculture principles, aligning those with positive psychology tools.
Mm.
This year I'm planning to do a permaculture design certificate, not so that I can become a permaculture teacher. I just really want to do that bit of learning because I love learning.
Yeah.
And with that, I will help to formulate those sorts of principles because I think it's a really sound model for the
Yeah.
world. So I love that, and as well as sort of changing my garden around and planting fruit trees and
Mm.
living that. I love preserving food. When my fruit trees get big, I'll be able to do that from my garden. But at the moment, I just go and pick everyone's extras or whatever and uh, do that.
Yeah.
Got my grandmother's old Vicola set out, and I just love doing that. I love that sort of process. I sew,
Fabulous.
make quilts, and which is a quilting is just such a bizarre thing where you buy beautiful fabric, cut it up, and sew it back together again. But that's, but I'm trying to do that with sort of finding interesting textiles in other places, like people's old shirts or whatever, and
Yeah.
doing those like it used to be. That's what it was in the old days. It was a way of giving those things another life.
Your life. Yeah.
So I do that, and last year I did a course in pattern making because I got sick of buying patterns, and they're all just sort of for the sort of standardized sizing, and none of us are standardized size. Most people have bigger
Yeah.
tops or smaller bottoms, or like none of
Yes.
us are standardized. So a
No.
pattern course helps you to make something just for you, so I can start making my own clothes. Like that's the
Oh,
sort of
that's
stuff I do.
fabulous. Yeah, yeah, that's brilliant, Mike. And I love that because I think, it's so important that whether we're in business or in leadership or whatever careers, that we have interests and hobbies outside of the career stuff, right? Outside of
Absolutely.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're all part of the whole. There's a lovely model in positive psychology that looks at all the different elements of your life, and it's really important to make sure you've got a balance in all of those parts of your life that uh, that I'm sort of feeding all of that myself to feed all the other work I do.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely fantastic. Well, Marg, thank you so much for being the very first guest for 2025 on
Mm.
the Coaching Circle podcast. I've absolutely loved our conversation, and you've shared so much gold and wisdom. And so what I finally just like to just say for people who have been listening to this and thinking, you know what, I could really do with some help with my teams or my leadership. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
They can go onto my website, which is memystrengthsandI.com.au, and there's a whole information about what I do. They can email me at marg@memystrengthsandI.com.au.
Fabulous.
I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook, and they can find me there.
You're all the places. I'll make sure all those
I'm all the
links are,
places.
yeah, I'll make sure those links are in the show notes as well. So,
Getting more consistent with those as well, all those places.
yes, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Marg. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for being my guest.
That's a pleasure, Tony. Thank you.